Lauren, are you ready to check this?
All right, good afternoon. The time is 5:03 p.m.
Hold on one second. I'm going live.
I was so ready.
We're ready to go live.
Okay, I clicked it. I was just loading. Now we're done. So,
Thank you. Good afternoon. The time is still 5:03 p.m. on March 29th, 2023. And this DC State Board of Education meeting is now called to order. This month's working session is being held in person at the Marion Asbury Junior Building. However, in-person attendance is limited to members, staff of the board, and guests. The working session is being streamed live on the state board's YouTube page for members of the public to attend. The state board will continue holding working sessions and public meetings in person. Please visit SBOE.dc.gov to learn how to submit and or present testimony at a meeting of the state board. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Dr. Fleischer, please call the roll.
Representative Bernstein. Representative Jonesburg. Representative Wages. Representative Washington.
President.
Representative Williams. Representative Chang. Representative Goulet.
Here.
Representative O'Leary.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Best. Representative Thompson.
Present.
Representative Green.
President.
Representative Pedersen.
Here.
Madam President, we have one.
Thank you. All right, so I want to welcome everyone to our March 29th DC State Board of Education working session. As a reminder, this meeting will serve as our April working session, which was moved to avoid several religious holidays and the CPS spring break. We have had one leadership meeting, which we sent a recap out to all members on Monday. That meeting was with OSSI, where we talked about literacy updates, we talked about the teacher retention bill, and we talked about, of course, our beloved proposed social studies standards. In April, the SBOE leadership also has meetings scheduled with OSSI, or scheduling meetings with OSSI and the deputy mayor for education. We do not have currently a standing meeting with DCPS, and our meetings with Chairman Mendelson are every other month. So we are in the process of scheduling our follow-up meeting with Chairman Mendelson, given it is budget season. Do members have any questions about the leadership report?
All right, I have a question, maybe it's Ossie's turn. Could you update us on the, what is the ESSA rating, when that will start being applied, and any things that happened since we passed a resolution?
That definitely sounds like a Aussie, not Ebony Rose question.
Yeah.
So if there are no questions about the leadership report, I guess we don't have a report.
I do not.
Okay. So if there are no questions about the leadership report, typically I would turn to Executive Director Bernice Butler for her report. Unfortunately, she fell ill today, so we do not have a report from her. We actually now can turn to the Office of the State Superintendent for Education. They have the next 45 minutes of our meeting to share, the next 45 minutes of our meeting to share an update on substantive changes made to the draft social studies standards. I'm now going to turn to Assistant Superintendent Elizabeth Ross, Instructional Systems Specialist Madison Cancer, and Deputy Chief of Staff Andrew Ball, I believe, is online to describe the revision process, explain significant changes, and share next steps.
Thank you so much, President Thompson, and thank you for the great question, Dr. Reed. What I'd actually like to do is take that back to my team. I don't want to speak out of turn, and there's another assistant superintendent who oversees that work stream, so I want to make sure I connect with her, but we'll circle back with you in writing as soon as possible.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight. We've spent quite a bit of time with you in recent months, and we really appreciate those of you, President Thompson, Vice President O'Leary, who could spend time with us yesterday at the LEA Social Studies convening. Tonight, we're going to spend the next 35 minutes or so talking through revisions that we have made in response to public comment and in response to state board comment. These revisions were sent to you in advance in red line, so we'll be highlighting specific revisions as we walk through the deck. Then we'll turn to the implementation timeline, and then we'll be happy to take any questions. To kick us off in talking through the revisions that we've made to the standards thus far, I'm delighted to have Madison Cancer. Madison, please take it away.
Good evening, all. Thanks for having us tonight. I'm really excited to share the revisions and the updates to the social studies standards with you all. Oh, no. So during tonight's presentation, as Superintendent Ross just shared, we're going to talk a little bit more about the pedagogical implications of tonight's new standards. We're also going to share updates and revisions to the draft. And we're going to talk about the ways that OSSE will support LEAs in implementing the new standards. We're also going to talk about the anticipated next steps in our collaborative process with the State Board of Education. So I want to briefly provide some additional context about the pedagogical implications of our new standards and just provide a little bit more background there. So inquiry-driven social studies instruction is not antithetical to the delivery of content. Inquiry builds on content as a vehicle for the development of social studies skills and for civic dispositions. By focusing our standards on inquiry, we provide space for educators to ask students really important questions about interpreting historical and modern source material and asking questions about the past and the present. The goal of standards is to emphasize student agency, making sense of the complex past, and to really move us away from these questions about who was the leader when this event happened, and ask more so, was this person a good leader, and how can we know that and according to who? Students develop our much deeper content understandings through this inquiry process and by answering these complex questions about where should I draw the line of a border. They really need to have a deep understanding of the geography, the history, and the economic characteristics of different countries to answer these kinds of questions. Inquiry instruction is, when it's really done well, it's scaffolded through rich but short instruction to establish background knowledge. And we know that a heavy content focus in the standards themselves really detracts from educators' willingness and ability to engage in deep and meaningful inquiry. Standards set expectations for assessment, and by including a focus on skills, the revised standards make it clear for LEAs that their assessment should also be focused on mastery of skills rather than on the memorization of historical content. So for the next few slides, I'm pleased to share with you the updates to the draft standards. So the work of responding to public feedback and standards revision was guided by a couple of conceptual priorities. Our first priority remains ensuring that the standards are aligned with the guiding principles and the priorities of the SISAC that were approved by the State Board of Education. As OSSE, the TWC, and subject matter experts revised the standards over these past 2 months, we were really attentive to the balance between necessary content additions and the balance between this idea of fewer, clearer, higher standards, so that we can really ensure that the standards can be realistically and well taught within the scope of the school year. OSSE also works to ensure that the language in each standard is clear and that it's vertically aligned, and we paid close attention to standards that the public gave low ratings on for clarity or for rigor. As OSSE worked, we also worked to ensure that our revisions reflected the best practices in social studies education, and that the revisions were aligned with expert reviewer and practitioner feedback. OSSE really appreciated the feedback from the State Board of Education and the public during the public comment period. We have also carefully reviewed the testimony from the public during the State Board of Education's public hearings. And we're also glad to have the opportunity to review and consider feedback from the Power Ed's teacher survey, which included 55 additional respondents. Public input has been instrumental in informing the revisions to the social studies standards. So the following slides contain just a few examples of the revisions OSSE has made to the social studies standards. For a more detailed understanding of the standards updates, OSSE has also provided a copy of the red line standards document, which contain the original standards language we produced for public comment in December, and the revisions we've made since the closing of public comment. Each revision aligns with public and SBOE feedback provided to OSSE in February. OSSE has also made additional revisions to the standards to ensure standards are clear and comprehensive where necessary. Next slide, please. You will see slides that have feedback from the State Board of Education in blue. In the following slides, you'll see this feedback from the State Board of Education in blue, and the main section will show you how we're responding to the feedback. Green text indicates a new standard or additions to an existing standard, and red line text indicates that content has been removed from the standards. All standards are numbered by grade level, and then of course the standard number. Next slide. So in response to feedback that Action Civic should contain a global lens for taking action, as well as feedback from the public that students should learn about the Holocaust prior to grade 10, OSSE has included a new driving concept in grade 8 Action Civics. Through this driving concept, students will consider different methods of affecting change on a global scale and consider the efficacy of different forms of US policy interventions and how to really take action as a global citizen. In response to the feedback about higher order thinking, OSSE has conducted a thorough review of our standards language, and we've replaced verbs like explain or trace with verbs like analyze or evaluate that can be measured through assessment. OSSE has also included clarifying language that each standard can be understood outside of the context of driving concepts. So we've included dates where necessary, names of continents where needed, or countries where needed. OSSE has also expanded the scope of digital literacy in grades K to 12. At each grade level, including kindergarten, has standards that help students evaluate online information and misinformation. So for example, in grade 6 now, students learn about specific strategies for evaluating the credibility of online sources about climate change, which is a topic that's often misrepresented on websites and across the internet. Next slide, please. We also really appreciated the State Board of Education's recognition of the use of humanizing language and the emphasis on historiography in the draft standards. And we've worked to increase the presence of both in our revised standards. In our World History 2 standards, which we'll talk much more about in just a bit, OSSE was really careful to ascribe agency to different individuals in their own histories. And we include both an analysis of dehumanizing experiences, but making sure that we also have an understanding of how individuals work to maintain dignity in the face of mass atrocity. Next slide. In response to feedback about evaluating white supremacy on additional groups in the United States and abroad, OSSE has updated the standards to include a wider history of the experiences of different groups within the United States, including expanding coverage of the origin of API discrimination as well as Islamophobia. For example, we've included the rise of anti-Muslim hate and violence, as well as federal surveillance of Muslim communities in the wake of September 11th to our US History 2 standards. I also wanted to add a quick note here on why we use the term hard history when we're referencing specific standards, especially those standards regarding slavery or white supremacy in the past. Hard history is a term that was coined by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it's recognized that there are aspects of recognition that there are aspects of history that educators and textbooks have traditionally actually avoided because the teaching of these histories requires significantly different considerations than teaching about Cleopatra. Educators need additional training and professional development in these areas, and especially in the histories where students have personal connections. So we use this term to really highlight that the teaching of these histories is something challenging, while also being incredibly important. In response to feedback about democratic principles, OSSE has included specific standards about the evolution of democratic principles over history, including a focus on the contraction of global democracy in the 21st century, which is really critical, and a standard that covers the impact of important elections on democracy in the United States. So standard 7.44 now reads, evaluate the legacy of presidential elections of 1800, 1876, 2000, and 2020 to evaluate the significance of peaceful transfers of power and their impact on democratic ideals. In response to the State Board of Education's feedback about the anchor standard system, OSSE has removed the anchor standard labeling system and created a document that clarifies how social studies skills can progress over the course of grades K to 12. At our LEA convening yesterday, we shared this document with our LEAs, and we heard a lot of positive feedback about it, specifically how useful it will be in professional development, how great it will be as a creator of a social studies rubric that can really assess multiple social studies skills across grade levels, and as a great tool for administrators and professional development for educators. We've also revised standards to ensure that there's vertical progression of skills and content throughout the standards. So for example, grade 4 standards focus on locating 13 colonies, while grade 7 now focuses on how the motivations of different settlers impacted regional differences within the colonies. And we also have included this vertical articulation of skills document, which further clarifies why a standard may look different in 4th grade than it will look in 7th grade. OSCE has also worked to increase the specificity in the thematic standards, particularly in grade 6 and world history 2, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. So for grade 6, under the 2006 standards, the geography skills of that grade are incredibly broad and don't actually specify which regions educators should focus on. So right now, the 2006 standard, 6.3.1, asks students to look at migration across the world and generally asks students to look at the general relationship between migration, settlement, and population distribution patterns. Under the current draft that we've submitted, there's a regional focus throughout the geography standards to ensure that students are studying geographic trends in all 6 continents, except for we have included Antarctica because the populations there are just not that significant, unfortunately. When the SBOE suggested with the SBOE suggested changes, it is clear that educators should focus on specific case studies within regional areas of focus. So for example, for standard 6.26, educators can choose to look at the causes, effects, and experiences of immigration to and within Vietnam as their case study for the Asia continent. OSCE has also revised the World History 2 standards in response to the State Board of Education's feedback, as well as in response to the really thoughtful and detailed public testimony provided at the State Board of Education meetings. OSCE has worked closely with the Technical Writing Committee, subject matter experts, and the University of Pittsburgh's Global Studies Center to redraft the World History 2 standards. The standards now focus on specific countries and moments in history and ensures that global communities have agency in their own history rather than understanding history as a reaction to European events. The standards continue to interrogate the history of imperialism and colonization, and we expand that history to include a focus on resistance to those events, as well as the experience of those events. So you can see in the examples provided here, that standard 2.31 specifically focuses on the expansion of the Ottoman Empire and centers the Ottomans as drivers of their own history and expansion. When our expert partners at the University of Pittsburgh reviewed the World History 2 standards, we were told they're so much stronger, and it is amazing to think of how important and impactful these standards will be on so many teachers and students. We're really grateful for that expert support. OSCE has also worked to reframe global perspectives and increase the global focus of standards across grade levels. In grade 7, for example, students now situate the American Revolution within the larger context of revolutions happening at the time period, including the Bolivarian revolutions in Latin America and the Haitian Revolution in the Caribbean. Next slide, please. And finally, but not least, OSCE has expanded the inclusion of religious minority groups in the United States and expanded the inclusion of AAPI and Latinx and LGBTQ+ history across the grade levels. In U.S. History 2, the standards now include an evaluation of repatriation of American citizens of Mexican descent during the Great Depression. And in the U.S. government course, we have a standard that focuses very specifically on the ways in which different groups have used the Supreme Court as an avenue to fight for citizenship and inclusion, including the establishment of birthright citizenship that was established in the long-term arc case. So head over to my colleague.
Thanks. Now I'm going to talk about the long-awaited and highly anticipated imperative of supporting our LEAs through implementation. We're going to shift from talking about shifts in the standards to talking about what that timeline has looked like to date and what we anticipate it will look like in the coming months and years. First, as everyone in this room knows, yesterday we spent the day with 27 LEAs. All LEAs were invited at an LEA implementation convening. We were excited by the energy and enthusiasm in the room, and we were really excited to have President Thompson and Vice President O'Leary join us for that event, to be able to hear directly from LEAs about where they are excited and ready to implement the new standards, and especially where they are looking for more support from OSSI and from each other in coming together and figuring out how to build supports and curricular materials that they can use to actually bring these standards to life in their classrooms. Our overarching implementation timeline includes the significant development of ancillary resources and implementation guidance with LEA leads, expert partners, and experienced educators. Then we're interested in supporting LEAs in using these ancillary resources and implementation guidance to adopt and develop curriculum and resources. Ultimately, we'll be supporting LEAs and OSSI in professional development to help ensure that the revised standards are implemented with fidelity across our jurisdiction. There are a number of resources that we anticipate providing, and one of the key goals of the convening yesterday was to hear directly from LEAs about which resources they need and how they need support in prioritizing them. Beginning this spring and summer, we're looking forward to working with our LEAs to develop sample concepts and sample content and concepts for each standard, a primary source bank, driving questions guidance, assessment guidance, curriculum evaluation guidance, approved professional development providers, professional development and coaching institutes, communities of practice, and a roadmap for implementation. As this group knows, the last time the standards were updated was in 2006, before OSSI existed. So in 2006, OSSI wasn't positioned to provide any of these resources since we weren't yet in the business of serving as the state educational agency. We are excited by the level of support that we're able to provide now and think that it's going to help support high quality implementation across our jurisdiction. Now I'll talk a little bit about the implementation timeline. We are here, spring 2023. We've begun partnering with experts to develop support for Summer Social Studies Resource Institutes and the Summer Social Studies Coaching Institute. We're also working to recruit DC educators to come together and work together at these institutes. We've allocated $500,000 in ESSER funding in order to support this work this summer, because we want to be sure that educators are compensated for the time that they'll be spending with us during their summer holiday, their summer vacation on this work stream. Moving forward to next year, in fall of 2023, we'll work with experts to refine educator-developed ancillary materials and ensure that these materials meet our definition of high-quality social studies instructional materials. We're excited to add that piece, the high-quality social studies instructional materials, to the work that we're doing around HQIM more broadly in literacy, math, and in science. In spring 2024, LEAs will begin updating their curricular materials using OSSI-produced resources, and OSSI will develop professional development modules that orient educators to new standards and provide resources for implementing standards-aligned pedagogy. We anticipate hosting these modules asynchronously in our learning management system because we know that they'll be useful for LEAs and educators implementing these new standards, not only in 24-25, but also in subsequent school years. In summer 2024, the educators will begin participating in those professional development modules, and in school year 24-25, LEAs will begin implementation of the revised standards. What this means in terms of next steps is that we're excited that SBOE is continuing to engage with stakeholders. We understand, based on communications that we've had with State Board, that those sessions are happening throughout the month of April, that there's one April 12th and a few, I believe one April 22nd and one April 24th. We are looking forward to getting feedback on those sessions as soon as they are held, because we want to take that feedback and use it to revise the standards so that we can come back and join you for the May 2nd working session to present updated standards that respond to that feedback that we're hearing from, that State Board is hearing from educators and from the community. We will also be listening very closely to this month's State Board public meeting and pay very careful attention. We always review all of the posted comments and listen to all of the testimony that educators provide so that we can respond and incorporate feedback around the social studies standards. Ultimately, this should put us in a position to get to a final vote on the standards in spring 2023. And we're excited to work with State Board in order to make that vision a reality. I'm happy to stop now and to take any questions.
And there's questions?
I have
I see,
one.
okay, I see Dr. Black, so let's raise his hand first. Then we'll go to Goulet, Vice President.
Thank you for that explanation, and seeing the changes was helpful. A couple of questions that just kind of popped up to me. The verbs was one that kind of jumped out, and shifting from like examine to analyze. I'm guessing there will be some guidance related to, like, I guess Dr. Henderson's version of analyzing might be different from my version of analyzing. So I'm guessing there'll be some guidance there, or just talk about the shifted verbs, or, you know, even with examine, I was kind of like, okay, well, examine, evaluate. What else? Action civics was one. I was able to talk to ANCAD about the standards, and they were excited that we're going to have some dates. And their action civics part about the year. I might have messed up though. I said 8th grade.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
they
correct.
were like, they want to see it as much as possible, and before then. So that was something that I would believe Ward 8 specifically would be interested in seeing. How does action civics start creeping into the curriculum, or not curriculum, into the standards before grade 8? And then the last question is actually for Vice President O'Leary and President Thompson. I am curious about like what you heard from the LEAs when you sat in. 24 LEAs is pretty big. The last time that we had this conversation, I believe ASC had 8 LEAs. So I'm happy to see that bump, but curious to see from a State Board perspective what you heard.
I thought they were really excited about the presentation yesterday. Went over more than this, more specific, and they were ready to get started. And I have a follow up to your question.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can also forward the materials from the meeting to the other members who weren't in attendance, so you can see those.
Yes, we were told not to forward anything until today.
No, I just told them
And
not
so-
to, I just didn't want them sharing the standards with their teachers until you guys had a chance to weigh in, so you didn't get questions before you were ready.
No worries.
Just sure.
So, but we can't, so yes, there is a whole Google Drive with all the materials, which we will share. And largely, I would say it was focused on like implementation and support. And so identifying from LEAs, like where they saw, not just like what they were excited about. They talked about what they were excited about. They talked about what they were looking forward to and how they understand the changes. But they were also able to say, with this particular standard, I see a need for professional learning supports for teachers, or I know that there's no book that we can buy off the shelf that accomplishes this strand of thinking. Like, what do we need to create? Also starting to talk about things like professional learning communities, and like literally like, not no matter what, not like we're gonna just upend the whole thing, hopefully, but no matter what standards we approve, there have to be supports to make sure schools can do what we're asking. And so that convening really focused on tangibly, like, what do we need to do as we make curriculum and standard shifts?
I can answer the question about the verbiage. So one of the things that OSCE is going to produce over the summer that will really make those rules clear for educators is part of our ancillary guidance includes sample assessments. And so that sample assessment will really show when your student is analyzing a document, this is the outcome that we sort of expect them to be able to do. It's obviously suggested in a sample, but that should clarify for educators what we mean. And the sample content and concepts will have more specific documents to analyze questions educators should be asking. And so really specific, not only does what analyze mean, but what does analyze in the next war causes weed. And so we're gonna have really specific questions embedded, which we heard a lot of support for yesterday. I'm really excited about that piece of it. And for action civics, it is embedded throughout. It's obviously much more prominent in grade 8. One of my favorite standards is in grade 3. After they sort of evaluate DC history, they take action specifically on an urban decision. And so in grade 3, that can mean a lot of different things. It can be anything from the height of houses, or it can just mean how can we get more recycling in our neighborhood. So really embedded throughout. And happy, I can send you a document also that highlights all of them.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, really, you've taken what the public said, clearly reflected it here. Do you know when it's going to be posted and in what format so the public can check it out again?
Currently on OSCE's website, on the
Great.
State Board of Education, on the State Board of Education's website. We should be tweeting about it this week as well, just to let the public know.
Okay.
And we can send a link as well.
And it's got the strike and inserts there so people can see what's changed.
We have
what's the
both
same.
the strikes and the clean version, just in case the strikes get that big.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. And, you know, we'll work with our leadership at the board to see what our public process is. But do you anticipate like any further public process that you're going to go through, just in kind of telling the public what has changed, what's different, and then what that means?
Thank you. I so appreciate that question. Throughout this process, we remain laser focused on transparency. We do not want to hide the ball. At the same time, we also want to respect the process and that we had our formal public engagement process. And now we view this period as us working directly with the State Board of Education and hearing feedback from you, and appreciate that you're hearing feedback directly from the constituencies and communities that you represent. And so we plan to continue to be quite transparent every time we make changes. We want that publicly posted and available to the public on our website. And we know that not everyone is clicking refresh on our website every day. So we'll get that information out via social media so people know when it's happening. But in terms of formal engagement, you know, we of course will always take questions from the public and can point folks to resources. But we don't anticipate opening up another round of formal public comment.
Okay, great. Just one last quick question. I don't expect you to know this, but maybe I can follow back up. I am getting a lot of questions still about the busing reimbursements and the timeline for that. That would probably be somebody completely different, but if you can, I know that somebody was listening online who was, you know, taking notes. So if they can continue to follow up on that issue, it's just really important for Ward 3 constituents who've been, you know, taking their kids to school to make sure that they get reimbursed in a timely fashion. And just keep us apprised of the progress on the hiring and the updates. So for whoever is taking notes online, please keep us in the loop on that and let us know, you know, what progress has been made and, you know, and how far we have to go. So that's just for the online OSCE presence.
And you are absolutely correct that I am not the right person to answer that question, but I am the right person to take that question back to our team and to make sure that you get a follow-up on it as soon as possible, along with Dr. Reed's great question earlier this meeting.
And they're listening on this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
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 We got the same
Listening on the
text.
hour.
Front row.
Me and
Yeah.
Representative
Yes.
Goulet got the same text. Constituent reached out to us.
We have
about that.
a Twitter presence.
Yeah,
It
and
was
they
conveyed.
reached out to us via that, and we promised them that we would bring that up.
For real?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes.
I don't know if you
Twitter
have any-
presence.
I don't know if you have any tweets to report out on, but.
No, I would just piggyback on what Representative Galais said from Ward 4, but you know what I'm talking about. Two things. At the Empower Ed thing last week
Yes,
that we attended, the thing about hard history came up.
yes.
I think it was a really good argument because it sort of localizes and it's saying, well, you know, this history is different. I think that maybe you ought to look at a different definition, even though the reference is really good, but I think that it still is isolation rather than inclusion as far as things. One other question about, this gets real technical, about I don't know which one it was, but when you mentioned the different elections, why isn't 2016 one of the elections?
So we included that in, I think that's a really good question. I think the significance of 2020 is the January 6th event.
I disagree wholeheartedly. but I think 2016, if we're talking about the United States government and everything like that, then I agree with you with 2022. But 2020 was the result of 2016.
I appreciate that point, Vice President O'Leary. What I'd like to do with specific comments, specific line items and feedback is just to take them back to our team, because we want to consider them comprehensively with the feedback that we hear as a result of those April working sessions. But point well taken.
And I have one broad question. This is going to be very expensive. All right, because this is almost a sea change in the way history was taught almost 20 years ago. Where's the money coming from?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So we're making a significant investment with our ESSER funds in order to support implementation. And we are really excited to be able to do that. I mean, we are doing our social studies revision at a point in time where there is significant federal funding that we can leverage for priorities. And we're glad to be able to leverage some funding for this social studies priority. And then, moving forward, are certainly interested and exploring other ways as we see additional supports that LEAs may call for. We were delighted by the event yesterday. We were just truly thrilled with the turnout. It is very tough to ask educators to step away from their buildings in the middle of the school week in the middle of March and spend time with us talking about implementation. And so that high level of turnout really suggested to us that there's a high level of hunger for us to, find resources and enable resources in order to ensure that we are providing fulsome support for implementation. So in the short term, we've allocated a significant amount of ESSER funding in order to support our schools in implementing this well. And in the long term, we are certainly committed to making sure that it is well implemented.
Because of the many changes that have been made in these standards, there are a lot of educators who really need to be educated about it's not just my father's history.
Yep.
And it's going to take a lot of training, which is going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to have to. You understand what I mean?
I absolutely do, and the point is very, very well taken. Social studies is something that we are certainly committed to supporting over the long haul. I think one of our clear signals of long-term commitment is actually sitting right next to me. So prior to engaging in this process, OSSE did not have a full-time social studies expert, and by bringing Madison on board, she is not a term employee. We certainly hope she never goes anywhere. I think that is a really clear signal that we are not in this for the short term. We are not in this just to change the standards and say good luck LEAs and walk away. We are really committed to making sure that implementation is successful, and the same type of engagement that we have done with State Board and with the community is the same type of engagement that we anticipate doing with our LEAs throughout the implementation process, because we are very, very cognizant that this work is only going to make a difference if it's well implemented. And certainly appreciate the Dr. O'Leary that in particular for some of these standards, we will not only be needing to provide resources, but also providing supports around additional types of pedagogical skills that many of our educators either may never have learned or may not have used in a number of years.
One other thing, and that is that the largest LEA really it wasn't represented as the largest LEA in the room as far as how are you going to deal with GPS and all the changes?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So we are very pleased that DCPS has been well represented on the technical writing committee and excited to continue working with them towards implementation. DCPS, as this room knows, educates approximately half of our city's students, employs approximately half of our city's teachers. And so in order for implementation to go well across our jurisdiction, it needs to go well in DCPS. We are in very, very close contact with the team team leading this work at the central office. And, we'll be working with them in order to ensure that we're supporting rollout at schools and leveraging the supports that they have in place, in central office and among their instructional superintendents to ensure that rollout happens. You are right to name that LEAs of different sizes will need different supports. At yesterday's meeting, we had a number of single site LEAs represented where there was an individual there who oversaw social studies while also overseeing science, while also overseeing data. And those are three really big hats for one individual to wear. And the kind of support that individual needs is different from the kind of support that a multi-person team at a larger LEA would need. And we're cognizant of that and, sourcing feedback from LEAs about what would be most useful.
I think it's Representative Williams and then Representative Henderson. Is that right?
I don't think I was, but I want to be.
Okay, I thought I was right, but, all right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let y'all work that out, rock, paper, scissors it out. I also need to put myself in.
Yeah, so thank you for all the work you're doing. I appreciate us trying to get to a place in which this is thorough and we can, really stand behind it as a city. A couple quick questions, I have like 4 questions total with 2 specific. So the standards broadly use the word contextualize, like when you're learning history, you have to contextualize something in an era, but there's no set skills to teach students how to contextualize. Has that been brought up before? Or have you seen where we're teaching students the skill of how to actually contextualize an event or an article or something like that?
Yeah, so when I think about the skill of contextualization, I really think about it as the Stanford History Education's definition of contextualization. And so we can talk more about the specific protocols for doing so. And one of the ancillary resources that OSSI will provide is a set of general, if you are trying to contextualize a source, here are some questions you would ask. When is the source created? What are the events that are happening while the source is created? I think my favorite thing to contextualize, right, are Hamilton's response to Melissa Jefferson's work, right? Like he's his political opponent. There's a lot of other things going on as well when he's responding. And that's really what we mean by that skill is what are the things that directly at the time period that are informing the response? And there's a set of protocol questions that we can include that go along with that. And that's one of the things we've tried to define in the vertical articulation of skills, and we'll define further in supplementary materials. Or here's a protocol. Broadly, here's where we can use it more specifically with the content.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate knowing that you're thinking about that and just knowing that we're thinking about that across grade levels too. I noticed in the updated document that the overview of global economy was redlined. Was that intentional or what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so some of the feedback, I appreciate that question. I actually thought a lot about that when redlining it. Some of the feedback from the State Board of Education suggested that our anchor standards were duplicative in some places. So the global economy is actually duplicative of another anchor standard, which I unfortunately can't remember off the top of my head. I believe it was the geography standard about globalization, which are ultimately the same about the global interconnectedness of networks around the world. And so when reading both of them, I felt that the geography one was actually more well aligned to the skill that we're trying to get out there. And in trying to read the vertical articulation, just realized the global economy one was really.
So if I'm understanding, we're not eliminating it, we're just trying to make it more efficient.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, so you had mentioned based on Representative Reed's questions at the sample assessment, I'm just curious if you could say a little more about like what form that will take. And then also, does that include specific like enduring understandings for teachers?
Absolutely. So what we're producing is this, and I can send you a copy as well. And it'll actually be a copy of the materials from yesterday's convening. So what we're producing is the sample assessments will be sample tasks, right? This is a task that will fulfill the objectives of this standard. We're also going to include things that are now, this task does not meet the objectives of the standards and falls short. We're not going to necessarily, and then in that we're going to say, this is what we want students to gain from the standard. The enduring understandings are a little more challenging, but we are going to include driving questions within the ancillary materials. So for example, if you're studying the Mexican-American War, one driving question might be, was James Gay Fulford the leader in the Mexican-American War? Did freedom expand? And so we're going to provide that form of driving questions.
Is it just what you're thinking behind why it's harder to provide teachers with enduring understandings? Like an advanced placement course will say like, everyone needs to know X, Y, and Z. And so like, even if you're understanding and evaluating it differently, like we're still on the same page as like what people are getting. So I'm just curious, like, as a city too, right, how do we ensure that, you know, students are leaving our classrooms with the basic knowledge that we expect them to get?
No, I really appreciate that question. And I mean, the ancillary resources are certainly not set in stone. And so I think that's something we can definitely look at and consider if there's a way to just make sure that we do that in a way that is not constraining to LEAs and educators who are interested in the curricular freedom, but also, I think to your point, provides additional guidance as well for educators.
Great. If you are, I think it'd be very useful, especially for newer teachers who don't know exactly if they're doing things right, and, you know, just having a firm ground to stand on so that they know that students are getting what the standards are attending.
Absolutely.
There's a
Appreciate
copy
that.
of that sample in your inbox now.
Thank you. And then I guess more broadly, just to zoom out, this is my last question, like, how are we comparing these standards to like other states? Like, how do we know holistically, right, that like this, where this kind of adds up structurally and in terms of content?
Absolutely. So I actually spend a lot of time looking at standards from other states. I've spent a ton of time in California standards, New York standards specifically. Delaware is weirdly, but not, we're much better. I've spent some time in Texas and Florida, and like I said yesterday, we're doing much better there as well. And I have spent some time comparing across. DC obviously has some unique challenges, both in the sense of us being a district and our federal relationship. DC is one of the few states. Massachusetts offers action civics, and I spent a lot of time looking at their standards. We are one of the first states to actually directly name what our course is as action civics, rather than couch that in a government and civics term. I haven't done a formal ranking of any of the states, but I have a very good sense of where we are, both from a sense of granularity, number of standards, breadth of standards, purview within the standards, and representation of different individuals from our standards.
That'd be great. If you have something like this, a summary or a primer on that, that'd be great to see.
Thank you. I've got two questions. One, so in the next month, we will be doing some formal outreach and engagement. But also, like, I haven't finished going through all of them, but like I've got notes. Can I like send those to you? Like, is there a mechanism for us to like send you notes to?
Yes, absolutely. And consistent with the comments that I shared around timeline, earlier is better. So we just because it helps us manage the workflow. And so the right contact on our end is always going to be Andrew Gall, who's listening in from home. But I think everyone here has his email address. It's andrew.gall@dc.gov, and we work in very close partnership with him. We always make sure it gets to the right folks. So please feel welcome to send things to him anytime. I'll make sure it gets to us.
All right, thanks. My other question was about the resources that OSSI is providing. Like, where are those going to live? Like, is that going to be like something that teachers can access on the website? Will it be public facing? Is it going to be dynamic over time? Is that so? I hear you saying the investment, like this initial push investment. How can we make sure that that's going to continue to be alive going forward?
I love this question, and I'm happy to tackle it. So first, we're going to be building resources, and we'll be convening educators both virtually and in person in order to identify and build those resources and create those resource banks. And then we'll be hosting them in two places online. So they are publicly accessible, and also in our learning management system, which is accessible to every DC educator. And the benefit of hosting things in our learning management system is we can more easily host it alongside videos or alongside training. So we can host a resource and a person walking through that resource, providing an example of how they might use that resource in their classroom, and then educators can download that, view that at any time. They can access it asynchronously. We also anticipate that we will be doing a fair bit of in-person professional development on site at LEAs in order to support successful implementation. And again, our timeline for pivoting from the resource development to the professional development, how will educators be using these resources, is really around spring 2024. So this time next year, we want to be moving from having all of our resources developed and created to then putting them in the hands of educators and working with educators to support use in the classroom.
and that'll be responsive, like you'll be able to add and subtract and change.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the benefits of doing the inquiry model of social studies standards is that the resources will continue to change. I mean, as the world continues to change, because we are developing students, supporting students in developing the skills that they need, they will be able to evaluate content as you know, as history continues to build on itself.
I have a couple questions. I know you mentioned the initial 500K investment in extra fund. I'm curious, given obviously wisely asked for an extension and it's been down, if you anticipate more spending to be able to build out and identify the needs over time.
What an astute question, President Thompson. We are not in a position where, you know, we're ready to say today that we'll be allocating additional funds beyond that initial 500,000. But certainly, are we going to be doing an evaluation of our areas of highest need and an evaluation of areas where we've spent either more or less thus far. And social studies remains a priority for our agency. I think anyone who has heard Dr. Beth speak about that topic understands how deep a priority it is for her, as well as for our division of teaching and learning. And so I'm not in a place to make a commitment about that, but I certainly am comfortable saying that we will be taking a careful look about what to prioritize with the additional time that we anticipate to extend those ESSER funds, and the social studies is a priority.
And then I guess similar to Vice President O'Leary's question about small LEAs, I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit more about like the supports you envision. Like I heard the community to practice opportunity, but I'm sure you all are thinking about other examples.
So one of the things I think is critically important, especially in smaller LEAs, is social studies coaching. And what's incredibly challenging about social studies coaching is that we might have an expert in social studies education in one school, but not another. But we can't, and they're not educators, they won't necessarily be a curriculum developer or a coach or someone. And so how can we get an educator from school A to work with an educator from school B who might be more of a novice educator? And so what I intend to set up is this coaching sort of video coaching model, which I've seen used in other school districts and done well. It can be incredibly effective. So if we have an educator who took our summer coaching on social justice education elementary school, they have good practices. We'll put some videos of them online, right? So that's the first step. Then the second step is educator B wants to implement those practices. And then for myself, a master educator or the educator who's incredibly good at the social justice practices can watch the video and provide tagged feedback. How could you have done this differently? How could you have done this differently? So it's asynchronous feedback, but it's been shown to improve educator practice. And what we want to do is grow that coaching model across LEAs so that we can ensure that A, we're growing our educators as leaders, obviously stipending them for this work, and then B, providing coaching for educators with smaller LEAs who don't have a social studies content expert on staff.
So I really appreciate that. I ran into my US history teacher yesterday. And I told, I introduced him to Vice President O'Leary because he's now, I'm not gonna say how many years into the classroom, because that makes me old, but like, we were his first cohort of teaching US history. And he was like, oh, since you're here and like you're a functional adult, I'm glad I didn't mess you up, right? And so, but he actually stays in touch with another teacher of mine who was his person like that. And he talked about how like she was the reason he could get through, not just that first year, but the second year and finally like the third year makes sense to kids, right? So I appreciate that. My last question, I guess more of a comment. We are still getting comments that assume the standards are, or the proposed standards have not had revisions thus far. And so I heard you all say that you were gonna think about like how to elevate, how to show the business. But like if I look at my inbox right now, some of the comments I get back, people don't know that they've been heard. And so I think that's something for us to think about in our engagement. But I really want to kind of underscore that you have done work to make some adjustments, making sure people know what version we're working off of now is really important.
Absolutely, and we're also working with our LEA partners to make sure they communicate this to educators as well. So when we get a follow-up email from the conference, we're going to say, please, Sarah, share this draft. I know on Tuesday we said that too.
Yeah.
On Friday, please disseminate.
Okay. Are there other questions? Oh,
I
Adam.
just have a clarifying question of what the steps are between this draft and the final version in terms of what other edits.
That's fully up to you and the engagement.
We're about to talk about that.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Any other questions on social studies or anything else? If not, that was Austin's only presentation for the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you guys as well.
Thank you all. We will be following along from home later this month.
All right, I'll give you all a chance to.
There is something, because I need to see, is there a Zoom link I can log into? If you can send that to me.
All right, so it is 5:58. I'm gonna ask, do people need to work now or do you want to power through? All right. We take 5 minutes to be humans, or 7 minutes really, and reconvene at 6:05. 5.
Did you hit the super vending machine downstairs?
I did. Are we ready?
So you got me tempted. I went down there.
And the
got
owl
one.
is back on.
I saw that. I was like, he found it.
I definitely went down there.
My watch
Had
says
to-
it's so
I
fast.
think that place is amazing.
I had to find the maze.
I'm glad I don't work here.
I'd be down there all the time.
All right, so we are live now, and we're gonna bring it back together. So, first order of business, state board, sorry. So we, of course, sent the Austin presentation already. First order of business, building on Austin's presentation, is the state board social studies engagement session. So, during our March leadership call with OSSI, we discussed with them the timing of SBOE engagement around the revised social studies standards. We concluded that the board should strive to complete our engagement and share feedback with OSSI so they can prepare revisions for our May 3rd working session. A little bit of color around that. It takes OSSI about 2 weeks to incorporate feedback. We're going to, so we actually may, that means likely we will have a June vote. I want to flag that for people because it takes them about 2 weeks and our last working session is at the end of April. Okay. And I want to make sure that we have the most recent, I'm going to come to questions so it'll all make sense. I'm telling you the things you need to know. So we are currently on track for a June vote for the social studies standards. The dates we have right now, Tuesday, April 11th, note that is Petworth Library, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Monday, April 24th, that is a virtual session so that people can go ahead and log on, be engaged in the press live. And then we have a Saturday session. It's April 22nd at Deanwood Recreation Center, 10 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. What we're going to do with this time before I come to questions about, well, and I will come to questions first. But Kathleen will share 2 options that we have for how we could structure these engagement sessions to get feedback. So first, and those are in your materials today. So first, I want to see if people have any questions about what I shared. Yes.
I was confused by, I understood the potential, the 2 week turnaround and then the June potential vote. But what did you mean by the last working session was in April?
The
Is it
last
not-
engagement session, sorry,
What?
the last engagement session.
The last.
The last, yeah, so the last engagement session is the last week of April. We want to make sure that what we hear from engagement is incorporated by OSSI before they come back to us. They're not going to have that completely. They will provide an update at the May working session, but you should also expect an update at the June working session, which means because we want to have all feedback incorporated, that won't be true May 3rd, which I'm flagging for people. They should then expect a June vote. That also gives opportunities both at the May public meeting to hear public testimony before we have the vote in June. Is that helpful? All right. Other questions? All right, I'm gonna turn it over.
Okay. So just one thing to note, this was printed before we changed the date for the event at the Deanwood Rec Center. So it says April 15th. It is no longer April 15th. It will be April 22nd, a week later. So that is a change from what you have written. So we're having these 3 engagement sessions to kind of cover a couple different goals. One, to update people who've been involved along the way and invested in this process on where we are now with the new revised draft and how we're going to move forward. We also would like to inform more people and bring them into this process who maybe haven't been involved or informed about the social studies revision. And we would like to collect some feedback from the public on the current version of the draft standards. So we kind of have those 3 things as goals for the meeting. There's a couple sort of considerations we need to kind of keep in mind in terms of the number of people who will attend. We're not really sure, but we're putting together a registration survey. So hopefully we will have a better idea. That's why you'll see a little bit of flexibility in terms of the meetings based on different sizes and like numbers of people who might show up. Also, just the number of you all and the staff who will be able to attend might change a little bit how we can structure the sessions. The space question is kind of answered now because we do have finalized locations. But also just considering the different roles and background knowledge of the different members of the public who might show up. So there might be a social studies teacher who's been involved the whole time who shows up, and they have a lot of different they have a different understanding and different interests coming to this meeting than maybe a parent who this is their first time hearing about it and wants to know, what does this change mean for my child? So kind of balancing all of those different stakeholders who may come to our events. So you have in front of you kind of two different options for how we might structure the meetings. The opening and the closing for both are the same. So I'll kind of go over those first and then the different options for that middle section. So I borrowed a little bit from Representative Best's agenda he sent us a couple months ago as a proposed, in terms of the opening. So talking about, what is a standard? What does that mean for, just what does that mean in general? And then doing kind of an intention setting question. So we could either do that as like a turn and talk or a share out, depending on how many people are attending. And so potential questions could be, what does a strong social studies program look like to you? What is important for students to learn in social studies? We can workshop kind of different questions later, give an overview of the agenda, and then a quick background on the process. So how did we get here? What are the guiding principles or priorities that we took into the revision process? What will happen going forward? And then also giving a little bit about those implementation and supports that OFI will be providing, just so people kind of have that same background knowledge going into the whole discussion. And then the closing, in both different models, there will be kind of a Q&A section. People can ask questions that maybe weren't addressed during the opening, or something that came up during the main portion of the event. Doing kind of a recap, what we talked about, as well as giving people information on how to share further feedback if they have it, so they can attend the public meeting that will be shortly after. They can follow up in all of these different ways. And then some sort of final exit ticket reflection question to sort of wrap everything up. So the different options come in this middle section. So in the first one, it's sort of based on the deliberative community forum. It's kind of the focus is to maximize the amount of time people have to be talking and discussing and giving feedback. So for this, there would be different stations where there would be separate questions of focus, which we could workshop if we select this one. I didn't want to do it if we were going to pick it. But they could be just sort of general questions about the standards as a whole. It could be something that would be role specific. So parents maybe might answer this question, teachers could answer this question, administrators or students could answer this other question. To kind of get that specific feedback, we could make questions around like specific grades or grade bands, or even specific standards that have been substantively changed. And so that's a discussion that we can have if we select this option, but what those questions would be. But people would have time to go through kind of a facilitated discussion in a couple of these different questions throughout that main portion of the event, with someone there taking notes or facilitating a conversation from the staff or from the board. And then the second one, again, those opening and the closing are more or less the same. But this one is more focused on sort of empowering participants and showing them kind of how actually can you approach reviewing the standards in general. So having that be kind of an introduction. So going over maybe how actually could we evaluate a standard, showing an example and brainstorming, what could we think about when evaluating it? We could think about, does it make sense? Is there a way we can make it clearer, just in terms of the wording of the standard? Does it fit with the other standards in the driving concept or the grade? Are there things or people that are underrepresented in the standards? Just having people brainstorm what they might actually think about when doing that review. And then evaluating a standard or two together with those questions or those concepts that we had come up with. And then there's a little bit less time to be in groups, but then people would have a chance to use that framework we had just set up of how do you review a standard, what do you think about, to actually start going through the standards together. And that could be in like stations as well, to give people time to go through different ones rather than spending 25 minutes on one. So are there any questions kind of about the two different models? If not, kind of after that, I want us to discuss which one of these we might want to choose for the engagement session. And then if there's anything that we could add to make it better, being cognizant of the fact that we only have an hour to be with these people and have all these same goals. Yes.
For the small group review of specific standards for the second option, I know that there's going to be like 3 copies of each standard for each school at each station. Is it going to be like full document of standards, or is it going to be a more?
I would, yes. So I think probably not. I think we would probably select a couple of those. I'm sorry, what are they called? They're like the unit. I can't remember the language that they use for it, or individual standards, probably focusing on the ones that have changed the most or that are new. So particularly that the world history too, that all of those standards are new from the previous version. But we can kind of look through and think about, if we select this one, what standards might be the most valuable for people to spend that time reviewing.
I really,
I was just gonna say one thing that came out of the session that we were at with Empower Ed, with one representative Larry and I were there, is someone had said, like, we've done like all this work kind of getting into the weeds with the process of like how OSSE and the state board of engagements work, but the community accesses it from a very different place. And so one idea was thrown out that I really liked was organizing these sessions by like grade band. So essentially having it by an elementary school session, a middle school session, and then a high school session. And then we could really push to get elementary school teachers and elementary school parents, middle school teachers and middle school parents, high school teachers, high school students, high school parents, because that's gonna be how people are experiencing the standards and the content, and also where they can connect more, right? Like if you show up for an hour and a half session, and you have a kindergartner, and most of the conversation is about how we're learning world and US history, that might not feel super relevant. So I'm just wondering if I'm cool with the formats here. I'm just wondering in terms of how we match what we're doing with community engagement, it would make more sense to organize it by grade band.
I think so. I have 2 thoughts. So my first thought was I prefer the second format because I think it gives you more specific. And I'm thinking about where we are in the process and the type of feedback that is most likely to be actionable by us. I think when I'm listening to you, Representative Williams, I have then 2 thoughts. First thought, a lot of people have kids at multiple grade levels, and people are going to want to go to what's closest to them. Like, I don't know too many people, like when we had the engagement session at Eastern, Vice President O'Leary was like, almost nobody from Ward 4 came because it was so far away. Maybe what we can do is, if we separate out, like if we think about the standards we have gotten the most feedback around, have options and saying like, if you are an elementary school parent, you can go to this group with this format instead of like having one elementary school session, but if you live in Ward 8, you got to travel all the way to Ward 4. Like that way we can do the type of engagement you're talking about. Like we can, like, but close to people's home.
Is that what you were saying?
It's kind of a combo.
It's, I try
Yeah.
to combine it,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Because I was seeing 3 separate groups in the same building at the same time.
And I think that's
Which
what
is
would
what
work.
I'm
Exactly.
suggesting.
Okay, rather than having to,
So I think that
Right.
also goes to the question about how many people will actually be there to work on it. If you're all gonna show up to all of them, if we will have fewer people, we have significantly fewer staff right now than we did 3 months ago to kind of work on this. So that would be kind of a deciding factor in the ways that we could set it up and how many groups that we could have, whether we were going to break it up by grade band or whether she just like, you know, if it's me and Ebony Rose show up to the 7-1, then we can't do that many groups. So like if other, it just depends on how many we're gonna be there.
Yeah, so Ebony Rose will travel, but, so at the previous engagement sessions, it was not like we just relied on the staff to participate. So like Representative Best, before he was Representative Best, sat in my governance session, like I facilitated it and we had Kathleen at the time take notes. If you are planning to attend and would like to facilitate, and you're like, I really would like to facilitate a session on elementary school, we can do all of that, but we can also send a follow-up so we can get counts from people as far as so we can have a sense of where we need to assign staff and where we will have numbers.
seems to me that, I mean, we don't know what numbers we're gonna get, right? The reason we separated it so that we have one virtual and one in Northwest, you know, west of the river, I guess we call it, and one east of the river, is that we would, at least we would have a different kind of a chance to get more people to come. But this is a really a base educational kind of a meeting. I mean, hopefully there'll be parents coming that just want to find out some. That's why I was saying we need a 1-pager. We just need a 1-pager because, you know, nobody's going to be coming there to try to figure out all the standards or anything. It's just a matter of what we've done as a board, what OSSI has accommodated us with as far as changes and things like that. Because it seems to me that our goal is the same, but we want to have as many people at these meetings as we can get, just to get information so we can pass it on to OSSI, because OSSI did say that they will accept this information. So we want to find out things. It's not going to be, you know, like somebody talks about, ought to have 2016 in the standard because that's when Trump was elected. Like I said, it's not, you know, we're not looking for minutia. We're just looking for people to understand that the standards are going to really, there's a dramatic change in the standards. And it's been so long since the standards were approved that Barack Obama, nobody even knew who he was. Does that make sense?
So I think one of the benefits of the second option, and thank you, Darren, for your idea, so it's his idea, is that it kind of shows people how to start taking a look at something that might be really overwhelming to reasonably to anybody. It's like 120 pages. Like, how can I start approaching this and get that knowledge and get a little bit of practice together? And then I think the next week is our public meeting. So saying like, if you have more feedback as you continue to look at this, because you have a little bit more experience in looking at standards, you can bring that to us next week at our public meeting. As a witness, you can send it ahead as written testimony. And we also, I think, are planning to have a panel about social studies at that one as well. Is that correct? But I think I heard this morning.
That is what we discussed.
Okay.
People.
So our
their
panel.
last comments. As much engagement as possible.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yes,
Okay.
so just double checking the dates, 11th, 22nd, and 24th.
Yes.
Okay. You know what time you're gonna do, because that'll be,
Yes.
11:15.
So it's not, this was printed before we changed it. It is now the 22nd because it was not available on the 15th. I do have the times.
Limited to 6.
The ones in, the one at the Petworth Library and the virtual one are in the evening, and the Deanwood one is in the morning. I can send you the times.
okay,
later. I don't remember the exact one.
And if people want to participate in these and want to stay, up to date, is there a contact person within SBOE that they would reach out to? That'd be, okay, great. And then just an idea on ways that maybe we could all get this public feedback is, I think what would be really helpful is if people emailed in written comments or something like that, that we could have a Dropbox or something where we could, that we do, we put all the comments we're getting in there, and then just kind of, that way we could just continuously read them as they come in.
So
Okay, great.
there are all of the live testimony that people send us the written version of, as well as the written testimony that we receive for the public meetings are in the Dropbox. And I can send that link out again if you would like it.
I would.
There were more informal comments that we received via email prior to the comment letter that we sent that were added as an appendix. So those are in there, but they are not in the Dropbox because they weren't like official comments. And so if we receive additional comments, we can include those in our feedback to OSSI after these sessions, and try to think about other ways to make this accessible as well.
So you'll distinguish between somebody who just sends you an email versus somebody who says, here's some comments for the record or something like that. And then
Yes.
you'll put those in. That
I
makes
did
sense.
also, for people who just sent comments via email, I responded to them, would you like this to be a public comment for the meeting? Almost all of them said yes. So those were, I just put it in a document and made it a written testimony.
That's great. All right.
Is there a time decided for the virtual meeting?
There is, I believe,
6:30. Monday, April 24th.
okay, yeah. We can send out the dates, the times again, because I think they were maybe not decided when I wrote this a couple days ago. But I'll send them out.
I think one thing for us to flag too is just to really have a strong push to recruit teachers, because teachers are gonna be the ones who are implementing these, who are gonna have experience working with the old standards. They're gonna, have training in social instruction. So like if there's, as Representative Larry said, there's different kind of purposes, like one is just to inform, and like that's important, but then in terms of still seeing this as something we want to improve, like I think our feedback is going to come, our best feedback is going to come from practitioners.
So I think if you guys want to look on this like logistics page, I did start putting in a couple ideas about ways to start with outreach and publicity. I know that's like, Malaya's got a lot of ideas on that she can expand on, but like generally the social media and having you all share that would be helpful. We can also try to get on different emails. So the WTU has a weekly email that goes out on Monday, trying to get included in that. Like the ward education councils, maybe direct outreach to schools for them to share with the teachers or the families, with the CISAC members.
You all will get an entire
Yeah.
packet, but we wanted to discuss with you all first.
And we've only got 2 weeks,
Yeah.
For the first one.
so we need to get the word out.
Yeah.
For social media right now, is there any posts or, I guess, virtual flyers you can share?
Malaya has been developing a virtual flyer. I think once we decide a little, like, I don't know when she's
That
gonna
will be
share.
part
She
of
will
the
be
packet.
sharing it.
So
and
you
that-
all will have, things to post, like just like you get draft tweets for the meeting, you'll get all the draft stuff before the end of the week. You all will also let us know if you want things printed, because you're the type of person that will go drop them off. And if you're not the person that's gonna do that, don't stress yourself. Just be honest. It's okay. But if you are the person who's like, you know what, give me 100 copies and I'll drop some off at my libraries or my schools or whatever, let us know that too. We can do that. You just have to come to the office and pick them up. We can do all of those things, and we will do all of those things.
Regarding the engagement session, I think I'd also like option 2. When I kind of let the ANC know that we were having like an engagement, they were excited, and I was like, don't shy away from standards. They seem sold on that whole concept of like, if you can imagine a child in your life or someone like that, you can dig into the standards. I think we shouldn't shy away from letting the community see what children are going to learn. And then that action civics piece really was something that got like conversation going. So if any way we can highlight like what's that going to be about, do you see any things that need to be tweaked, changed? And again, obviously, they were interested in like, how does it appear earlier? Which I know Ossie answered some of that question, but so you ever like, you said, maybe the example of action civics about like, not the full thing, but one of the
Yeah.
examples of action civics of like what components may be present, like, don't like. But yeah, people didn't want to shy away from like getting into the actual standards. I know we have to make it bite size, but letting them explore them a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide feedback and partner with like how it can make this palatable and efficient to the public. Because even giving a presentation last week, like if we spend time kind of talking about the background of all we've done so far, that could go for 20 minutes. And then you're kind of getting people bogged down in the weeds. And it's just like, let's get it to a place where we can talk about this in a relatable way. And it's challenging, but I think that would be most useful.
I mean, it's
Kathleen has
everything.
on here, the 10-minute one on the second page. Those are really nice, simple kinds of questions. You know, we have no idea who's coming. I mean, we know who comes in and testifies every time. You know, those are people who are agents for whoever they are. But, you know, what I'm looking at, because at the Petworth Library, I'd like to just have people from, you know, Northwest and basically it's Northwest would be coming there just to find out information kind of thing. And maybe have a question that would be relevant to go back to us. So we want to have it as down to earth as possible.
But one of the things I'm thinking of is like, I know that like the Aussie's public comment period is over, but are we thinking that there's any efficient way that we could engage the public if they weren't able to make these 3 times? Like if we're able to send the materials and have a Google form or something, you know, just because I know that you have a lot of people who, if they could do it on their own time, might weigh in, but if they can't make these times, you know, then.
They can email the state board with feedback.
Like, we'll share all the feedback. So I want to be out, and this is an I, like literally, as individual. I think it's important to be honest with people about like, to your point about where we are in the process without making them feel like there is nothing, like, I feel like if you talk to people about all the things that have already happened, I know one thing I hear all the time is people think the decision has already been made and they don't want to engage any further. I also think it's really important to, as you collect people's feedback, like actually do something with it, which is why I think being very clear around like when pencils, like when Aussie's pencils are down is important with people too. So like, I want to be transparent as possible that Aussie needs 2 weeks, you know, to get the feedback in. So thinking about just like all the time constraints and when we're telling people, you can leave here and bring us stuff back. I know people are like, have all the things in life, and then they might take 2 or 3 hours to do something, and I want to make sure it gets used. So I think being transparent with them about like what the timelines are to get stuff back to us, making it like things like come to our public meeting so it gets officially included, or email us, like being very clear while making it manageable so we can actually hand it to Aussie and it's incorporated is like a hard balance. Also, these dates account for things like spring break and Jewish holidays and all the things. So it's also just like April and then like super involved people involved in budget and all the things. It's a hard time. And so are we. I mean, we'll talk about that next, but yeah, if we got to be really, I'm thinking like we have to be very intentional in our design to make sure people's feedback is incorporated.
So what I'm hearing, I think, is people prefer option 2. Do you want to like vote on it, or is it that? I don't know what the procedure is.
We don't typically like vote
Yeah.
on meetings, but like, does anyone
anyone
have any
opposed to that?
strong reactions that they would prefer option 1? All right, so most people are comfortable with option 2.
Okay.
With the like the adjustment or the combination of filling out grade level representative material so that it can be most close to people's experience. All right, that's what I heard. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so I want to thank the members for, I guess, their engagement on the engagements. We will be, of course, like advertising these events, hopefully starting this week. To the public, staff is going to email out final event descriptions and share all of the social media plugs and things you can use to promote the event. We've already had our breaks, so we're going to go straight into committee reports. A little bit before committee reports. Before jumping into committee reports, you should have received an email. I think some of you got it today from Director Butler outlining the roles and responsibilities of committee chair, in some cases co-chair, SBOE staff, and committee members. Dr. Fleischer is actually going to spend some time sharing with you like what you should expect as you jump into committee work, and then we will do committee reports.
Yes, thank you. Screen. All of you should have printouts of this presentation. Just gonna move along a little bit. So this is kind of an exciting part of starting out with work plans and all the different projects that you can work on in your committees. I know with some of the members that have been here for the past few years, they can certainly help walk the newer members through this, but I just wanted to share with you in these next few slides, best practices, what the first committee meeting will look like, what the planning around projects will look like, as well as planning around budget items to help ensure the success of those work plans. And so just first off, the why of the work plans, there's a lot going on. We have working sessions, public meetings, there's all sorts of holidays. And so just keeping track of what other committees are doing at the same time as your own committees. And just making sure that we can keep track of overlapping projects and sequencing project milestones. So just having something visual that you can look at and say, okay, by August, we should be here with this project item or milestone. So by this time, we should be getting out the surveys, or we should be collecting, taking the feedback, collecting it, and then doing something with it. We should also be mindful of the steps needed for project success, building in equity into the projects. So instead of just executing a project, being very mindful of, are we reaching out to everyone when it comes to this project? And I have a link in the slides on Dropbox for the State Board's equity statement and framework. And it kind of talks about building in equity into these projects. Lastly, just balancing statutory duties and areas of interest. Just looking at what can the state boards do with the interests of the members of each committee. On your printout and in the slides, there's an example of what the work plans will look like. And so, for example, school, community, and well-being, as you're building out your work plan, you'll see both calendar dates and fiscal year dates. I don't know if you can really see it on here, but starting at the end of September is the end of fiscal year 23, and then it starts October 23. I'll talk more in a little bit about budgeting out items, but whatever's in the fiscal year 23 budget items have to be spent by the end of September 23rd. Or if you need printouts or something like that, it needs to be printed out and ready by fiscal year 23rd. You'll see X's, so whatever the item is on the far left would be the milestone or project item. Then you'll have like a lead, like Brandon and Darren would be taking lead on this item. The status, is it started yet? Is it complete? Is it in progress? And then the months, and when these, an X would represent when that should be completed. And so later on, as we're doing working sessions, committees will be providing committee reports. They can use this to look at where they are in their projects and share out with the group. But this is a good visual of what everything should look like by the end of 2023, 2024. So your first committee meeting, you're going to really look at what work you are interested in. I know at the first working session and during the retreat, we started to build out areas of interest. So for example, for the school, the well-being committee, the healthy schools, mental health, school safety, what in there, what would projects start to look like and what can the state board do around action? And then started to narrow those projects based on topics and then filling in the work plan from there. You'll also begin discussing potential budget items needed to achieve these committee work. When I say potential budget items, you're going to identify them, but during a working session, the president, vice president would then vote and decide which of them would actually be funded, not just based on the budget.
What happens is everybody presents their work plans at a working session. We will have a conversation, we will talk through and prioritize items, and we will make a proposal based off of the conversation. We don't go into a room and vote on.
Yeah, sorry. And I'll show in a little bit, one of the slides, what that looked like, what a discussion would look like, where everybody piles on what they like, and how much it costs, and the rationale behind that.
Do we know like what money we're working with, like in that context?
Yeah, that's a good question. Prior to committee meetings, I think we could possibly, let me get back to you on that.
So it's complicated right now because we know how much money we have left for the rest of the year through October. We do not know our final budget for October, like for October moving forward.
You mean through September?
We're on a fiscal year, October 1 fiscal year. So we know how much money we have left as an agency through September 30. Given we are currently in budget conversations, we don't know how much money we have for the full calendar year. So yes, we will provide some guidance around what we have, but it will be, if it was today, it would be, of course, incomplete because we're not going through the full budget process.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll kind of go into a little bit more about ideal budgets for projects. And so following that first meeting, I just have a few notes of post meeting. The chair will then share a clean draft of the work plan for the president and vice president staff rights committee report. For the May 3rd working session, staff sends calendar invites for the upcoming and reoccurring committees. So also in that first meeting, you're gonna, I think I mentioned a cadence. So every other month, are you going to meet? When are you going to meet? Is it going to be the first Tuesday of every other month and at what time? That's part of that first committee planning. And then the chair communicates with the admin committee, the draft work plan. Another thing, so in that first committee, I mentioned levers of action and how the state board can actually take action around their projects. So research, advocacy, relationship building with stakeholders, impacting policy. Those are 4 general buckets of levers of action. So with research, once you identify what you're interested in, you could say, okay, we can then go on and do a report or a survey and find out more information on this. So I'll use the teacher practice committee did teacher retention work and shared out surveys with teachers. Advocacy, sending out letters, writing resolutions as a committee, setting up events, panels, webinars, roundtables, relationship building with stakeholders, taking what you hear from communities and then sharing it with agencies like OSSI or impacting policy. So going back to teacher practice, they shared out survey, teacher retention, they got information on from teachers, and then it helped write or introduce legislation like the statewide data warehouse legislation. And Fraser could, I'm sure he did a lot of work on that. He could definitely share that. But those are areas of action for the state board. As I mentioned with budget items, this is, I know it's small, but this is typically this is what it looked like last year for 2022. So the final list of committee budget items, some of it's cut off here, so this is just a screenshot. But on the far left would be the committee. Then you have the project name for that committee's work, and then a description of that. And then on the far right would be how much it's expected to cost. So from those discussions in 2022, at the April 6, 2022 working session, members discussed all the budget items for all the committees. And then it was decided which of those would be fully funded. And again, to your point, Ben, we'll know more about the budget, but just estimate. Right now, part of the work plan would be just sharing out estimates of those project items. And then just some committee budget tips. I know I need to get this right for Roma, but allocated funds must be spent no later than the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, 2023. There's more information on here. I'm not really going to go into it. It's in your printouts and on Dropbox, but just some information about P cards and micro purchases, small purchases, RFQs, are procurements of up to $100,000, and purchases of $10,000 or less can be non-competitive, and that's an important part. Given the size and scope of the state board's work, it is recommended that we aim for these type of RFQs. So when I was doing focus groups, I was reaching out to a vendor. They know already to aim for $10,000 as to be competitive, but just aim for 10,000 or less for these projects so that it saves us some time and to get the ball rolling on those projects. Just some best practices for work plans, be mindful of member and staff capacity, create clear goals and measurable outcomes for all the projects and objectives, be mindful of school and federal holidays, as well as teacher planning when suggesting public facing events or outreach. If you want to do a survey and you want to get teacher involvement on that survey, you would not want to do it during the summer when everybody's out. So making sure just whatever you're doing, be it ANC meetings, just being mindful of that in the work planning. And lastly, identifying education stakeholders you would like to partner with during that process. So for example, the Office of Student Advocate, Office of Ombudsman, nonprofit organizations. I'm not going to go through all of this. Again, this is in Dropbox, but just these are the general steps. So scheduling your first committee meeting, having the first committee meeting, the committee reviews and finalizes the work plan, usually offline. After that first committee, you'll start putting that together, work offline on those, and then the full board would review and agree on finalized work plans at the working session along with the budget items, and then execute those work plans. The committees would then, at the following committees, start to work on those. Are there any questions? Or yes?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fleischer. So just in terms of the meeting, can they be virtual and in person, or
The committee meetings.
the committee meetings, or are they only in person?
So committee meetings that is up to the committee. Over the last year, so not like the last calendar year, all of our committee meetings were virtual. When we returned to an in-person posture for the full board sessions, we gave committees the option of what they wanted to do. So the student advisory committee said they want to be in person, they live their best life, they have snacks. Most of the other committees decided to remain virtual. And the chair will be if that is the case, the chair will work with the staff members to make sure that it's set up like with the state board Zoom and recorded and all the things. So it is up to the committee.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. And I do want to mention one other thing. I'm going to go back to one of the slides. When it comes to panels, so public meeting panels, that's another thing where when in the beginning stages of that, once the work plans are finalized, making sure that we have those planned in advance for the public meeting. So in July, if you want to have a public meeting or a panel, an expert panel or whatever panel for your committee, making sure in advance that we have that scheduled.
And as a general rule of thumb, we will only do like one panel for a public meeting, correct?
Yes, we will most likely never do more than one. We technically don't have to do any. But yes, we will pretty much never do more than one. And I would say, think about what points where you want the public to know your work is moving forward. Like when it might help get public testimony, when you might want to educate the public on like an update. So, and we just try to like look at all the work plans together so we can calendar it out.
And like, sir, oh, I'm sorry.
The board, last year, the last couple of years, the board has had more than 2 committees. And I think, Carleen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think almost all of the committees had a panel at one point last year.
A round table, something.
Yeah,
Probably, that's
I
probably.
think so. So we may have had 5 committee panels, not of the committee itself, but of what they were advocating.
And you can have experts, guest experts at your committee, so it doesn't have to be at a public meeting. Also, life surveys, I mentioned earlier, just having clear goals for certain items, but also if you're going to do a survey, what's the goal of the survey? What are you trying to get from it? Is a survey question or item getting at the goal of the survey? Same thing with panels or anything else. Having a clear goal for each of these. What do you want to get out of it, and how does it elevate the work of your committee?
For our teacher practice committee last year, we had guest speakers at almost all of our meetings. People from around the universities in the area and thing like, even because it was virtual, we had somebody from Tennessee. They were very helpful.
If there are not other questions about committee work and committee work plans, knowing this will be an ongoing discussion, you can have questions later. And also previous committee work plans are on our website if you want to dig in and see like what some of that look like. I'm going to move us to committee reports. So right now we will have reports from admin, bylaws, and the student advisory committee. Each committee chair or co-chair, I think in this case we have all chairs, will have at most 3 minutes to report quickly, followed by 2 minutes for questions. I'm going to start with admin.
We met, and the admin committee is Representative Chang, Representative Patterson, President Thompson, me, and Dan Davis and Serena Hayes. And we heard from Serena is in the process of hiring someone. But that was what we heard from the ombudsman. From the student advocate, Dan Davis told us about, there are 2 events happening next month and in May. On April 8th at SOME, S-O-M-E, at the Conway Center at 4430 Benning Road Northeast. There's a Know Your Rights for Special Education conference going on. is on April 8th, from 11 to 1, so that anybody can come and who has any kind of relationship with special education, especially parents with children, to find out what their rights are with the special education. And then there's the student leader seminar at the Boys and Girls Club on 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast on May the 6th from 10 to 2, where they have a lot of student leaders from different student organizations throughout the city. I think it would be really exciting for us as members to come in and just observe that kind of thing. We are in the process, the staff is in the process of hiring that hasn't been, I don't think it's been publicized yet, but it's almost publicized, right? The vacancies for Caitlin's office and for Alex's office. And I don't know, how many of you have signed up to testify at the budget hearing on the 5th? Okay, so I would encourage everyone to testify because we want to testify for 4 vacancies, 1 with the ombudsman, 1 with the student advocate's office, and 2 for us. And just hearing your voice will be a big help. So we want to make sure that everyone, if you can, testify for that. It's not too late to sign up for it. You just go on to DC City Council hearings and look up the April 5th hearing.
I agree with you, Representative Belier. To that effect, is it possible to get like a couple short talking points around SBOE needs so we can kind of be speaking with one voice?
Yes,
Sure.
that's what we discussed today.
We did. So you'll get that by the end of the week. Thank you for that. That's it. Did I make it in 3 minutes?
I did not time carefully, but
Sure.
do people have questions, other questions about the admin committee report? One, I guess it's a clarification. So for Serena's office of the ombudsman, she's replacing our outgoing assistant ombudsman. That's what she told us today. And then there's positions for Caitlin and Alex are being reclassified to reflect the, so they have to go to DCHR. Yeah, they're being reclassified to reflect the new description that you all saw. And so those positions will be hired in accordance with what we shared at the retreat.
And all that paperwork is in and should be okayed as far as being able to be interviewed and stuff like that next week.
Other questions about the admin committee report? All right, next up, AB bylaws.
So we took notes on what everybody said at the retreat. I much appreciated the comments. We had to cancel the last meeting because I had a scheduling conflict. So I'm going to get with Representative Bernstead, Representative Reed, set a time for a new one. Now we've lost Alex in this, but that's okay because I'm going to set aside about a weekend to sit there and just power through this and get a draft ready for everybody. Alex was a big help on everything, getting us to this point.
But you still have staff support.
Yes,
Even though it's
and
not
then, yes, even though we will, and I'm glad to sit down and do it myself. I need to block off time. I've been very busy, so not much to report on this, but we're gonna get something back for the next working session. What I said as a goal for myself is to give you ahead of the working session, a draft of it, but we're gonna wanna meet as a ad hoc committee first and just go through it, but then get to everybody a draft so we can actually talk about this at the next working session, which is just a little over a month away. So I'll have something concrete that everybody can review in advance of the next meeting.
Other questions?
Thanks for your work on that. That sounds good to me. Generally speaking, given that the working sessions are on Wednesdays, like if you're able, whenever that is, to get it to us with the weekend to be able to.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Because
Then the budget's a lot more time, because once the work week gets started, it's hard to try and find that extra time if we just get it like on a Monday or Tuesday.
yeah, we'll make sure that's before, so you have time during the weekend, because that's what I've been doing is just using weekends and this stuff too. So if you don't have the weekend, it's impossible.
Thanks.
Other questions? All right, so the advisory committee.
So our last meeting was March 6th. We heard from Scott Goldstein from Empower Ed on their newly released flexible scheduling proposal. And we also heard from Dan Davis from the Office of the Student Advocate, who came to discuss another upcoming student leadership summit. So hoping for some SAC participation with that. And then we passed 2 resolutions, the mental health standards and the board's committee structure resolution, and signed on to the budget report. And then lastly, for the future, we're going to be starting a new project soon, so look up for updates with that. And we'll be meeting April 10th, I believe, so 2 weeks.
Any questions? No, I'll take this time to say congratulations. I understand you are now the Youth and Government City Council Chair.
Awesome.
That's new, like within the last what?
Yeah, it was last weekend. At legislative weekend, it was fun. It was our statewide conference. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, external committee reports. Does anyone have external committee reports?
Just reporting out that the RPP has not met since the last time, and currently there's not a date on the calendar at the moment. Just want to put that on record. I didn't skip it, just haven't had one since the last report.
When did it last?
Ooh.
February, late
Yeah.
February.
I can get you a date. So when I looked at-
Just curious at the time.
Yeah, it's been probably 6 weeks. Come on, I'm sorry. Month or 6 weeks.
Healthy school facilities, which is not really completely external. Nancy had the third convening of all the state teams. We will send, that happened Friday. Yes, that was Friday. We will send all of the slides of this one. When they bring the state teams together, people kind of just give an update on how they're doing. But then they also bring in an expert. The expert this time was from the Council of School Facilities, which is actually based in DC, and talked about just different resources that states can use to like do inventory and report and see how their facilities are doing. We can also send the invite for the DC team meeting if there are members who want to attend the team meeting. Quick recap, the team meeting is both like SBOE members, but it's also has people like Jen Cummings from the Deputy Mayor's Office, Dr. Amy Mysterio from DCPS, have a representative from Friendship, James Waller. We have a couple different people that are looking across. Mary Filardo's on our team from the 21st Century Schools Fund. So if you would like to attend any of those meetings, we will send the invite out and you all can listen and discuss. Our next steps are to hear back from Jen Comey, who is taking some inventory on like what we already have. So things like around safety and requirements that we already have on the books. So we know what exists, we know where gaps are, and we know like some of the good things we should keep. Questions? No. Okay. Representative Chang, do you have anything on the literacy?
We are meeting next week, and I should have more to report that.
What day is that? House?
It is Tuesday, April 4th at 4 p.m.
At what time?
4 p.m.
And one thing that flagged for kind of like the budget ask or how things kind of go down is when in the next budget cycle, like it would be best to get information like our State Board of Education budget letter to the mayor. But I heard recently that they kind of have more things kind of figured out, even in the fall. And so just wondering if we can kind of think about how as an institution, we prioritize that earlier to be more influential in that process. I think it'd be a nice step.
Does that mean people don't have any more questions or report outs about external committees? Because I'm happy to move on to this.
I do have one question, Representative Chang. Something that came up during, Councilmember Trayon White's community engagement sessions on budget. We had a community member who gave a large testimony related to, literacy, and he specifically called out the, literacy task force about community engagement. Are there community members present? And then, when could that happen? Where can we space that up to like,
I've just been, anyone who's not on the task force who wants their voice heard, I've just been meeting separately between meetings. Raising their voices.
The task force is based on the legislation exempt from the open meetings act, so that's why people who are not appointed to be on it are not invited.
Yeah, it was just a,
Does that not like whether anyone should, that's just like
Yeah,
why
no.
that's not
he
happening.
just seemed interested in the work, and I found it back then, he called out specifically because that level
Yep,
of
and it was
detail,
something
so
we
yeah.
were advocating for.
Okay.
So I, for example, meet with decoding dyslexia. Between
There should be, the task force is planning a survey to the public to kind of get feedback. We don't know exactly when that will be published. Our representative Chang is trying to figure out when that will be, but eager to help share and kind of disseminate that whenever it is live.
Thank you. All right, thumbs up. New business and other discussion. At this time, I'd like to ask members if they have any additional items of new business to add to the following list. SBOE FY24 budget, both implications and next steps, SPED panel debrief, and next steps on education governance report. Yes.
I do. It's, I think you can title it special education certificate versus diploma. So an issue, would you like me to get into it now or yet?
I can't either add it to the end of the list, or I would assume that's something we can talk about as part of the SPED panel debrief. Kinda.
Not quite. Yeah,
Well, I will add it to the end of the list.
sure.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Let's start with education, SBOE FY24 budget implications and next steps. I want to say Director Butler has slides, but of course, she got sick at the last minute. So a couple of highlights, I guess, building on Representative O'Leary's admin report. So one, we currently have, we submit, and so maybe it's helpful to do a little background. We submit as an agency our mark for the mayor in fall. Actually, yeah, we submitted in the fall, like early fall, like not, we're not talking November, we're like September. So we submit our mark. Included in our mark were 2 enhancements positions for the agency, and including some other asks like updates to our chambers. The 2 positions that were considered enhancements were, 1 was another admin person, 2 was a person to do community engagement. We were not granted either one of those positions. We also did not receive money to update our chamber. The reason Vice President O'Leary is saying we need 4 positions because there are also 2 ARPA funded positions. 1 that is currently within the office of the student advocate, 1 that is currently in the office of the ombudsman, which, because they were ARPA funded, were not replaced with local funds. The mayor's office is counting those as enhancements because they would be additional local funds. So they were not, they're not positions we asked for in addition to. We asked to maintain those, but they're not. Let me just get it right down because I'm gonna lose something since I don't have Director Butler's slide. So that's how that's the 4. Also, you may have seen in the agency books, is an additional, there's 66K. The 66K is largely for things, is essentially COLA and merit increases for existing staff. So that's to cover that. And there is $45,000 that says member, like it says something like member or something. I can't remember what the language is. That is a $5,000 raise for each elected member. That money came from the council. They said ABRA and the state board both got raises this year because they asked for a compensation review because the state board has never had raises. Final thing I will highlight, one of the things we requested for this year is the student representatives adding $1,000 as a scholarship for each of them. The reason it is a scholarship and not a stipend is because they can also accrue community service hours, since they do a lot with us, if it is a scholarship. So that is my rundown of the highlights. The last thing I'll say about the priorities differ from the agency budget. I know there were questions about the literacy investments. I followed up with Dr. Grant and said, I know members have questions. I also know that all of the members, like myself, this is a part-time job, and I would imagine are not diving into every single budget. So can you identify for us where literacy investments are? Dr. Grant sent an email this morning, knowing that Andrew will not be able to join us today. That is in you all's email boxes. It details how they are spending in particular ESSER funds, which are not local funds, which might also be one of the reasons it was hard to find. And so if members have questions about that, let us know. But I did want to let you know that you now have additional information about that. So that is my spiel. I'm sorry that we don't have the slides because we're doing this and things happen. But I know you had a question, Representative Boulay, and I'm going to open it up for questions first.
Yeah, President Thompson, are the two positions that are being eliminated filled right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So those two positions, not only are they filled right now, but those are caseload positions. Those are people, when I say caseload, so both the Office of the Ombudsman and the Office of the Student Advocate have caseloads that they manage. Those positions help like manage those caseloads that come in, parents and families that are calling for educational.
That's probably, just let us know how we can help advocate for them.
Other questions? Yes.
One other thing is that the two positions we're talking about for the State Board of Education, those aren't Caitlin and Alex's positions. I just want to clear, because I know if I didn't know that, I would be asking that question.
So we're still in the process of hiring two positions or two people.
Yes, so those are existing positions. And those will be filled before. So we don't have them. Yes, they were not, they're existing positions. Any existing positions we had, minus the ARPA funded ones, are still funded. Other questions? All right, if there are no other questions, okay.
Yeah, so I don't
I just
know.
want to get all the questions out the way before we go to the discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if you can answer this.
I'll tell you if I can.
Like the biggest chunk from the literacy investments are these grants passed through comprehensive literacy state development grants. What are those for?
Yeah, that's a federal grant that we got last year that we tied into a new literacy plan that they have 5 years to spend down. So a piece of it was already utilized. Some of it was originally allocated for structural literacy instruction. The majority of it went to grants to LEAs. A handful of LEAs.
So the comprehensive literacy state development grant, 95% of it is going to LEAs, 5% is spent on like statewide functions, like they did a literacy convening event last year, so that's where that went. But for the sub-grantees who apply, they can use it on funding literacy focused additional staff. They can spend it on training. So some schools are using it to pay for letters training for their staff. And they can also spend it on high quality instructional materials for literacy.
What year are we with that grant?
Let me say 2, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
We're like in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I'm gonna share the link with everyone so you can see which LEAs got the grant. And it goes along with the 120 something page literacy plan, which I have commented on in previous meetings.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. All right. If there are no other questions, let's talk budget. I sent in my leadership report, I noted that the Ed cluster hearing is April 5th. We will also provide, we have to provide agency budget testimony in addition to Dan and Serena for their our sister offices also provide their own agency testimony on the 7th. We will include in our agency testimony the push for the positions. My guess is those positions are going to be a priority over that unfortunately raggedy chamber that I would love to be hybrid and wish flies to stop flying around us. But we should talk about that. I'm assuming that's the responsible thing to do, but we should have that discussion. We also should talk about the budget priorities in our letter and if there are additional pushes that need to be included. But I want to open that discussion up now, but we are immediately talking about budget advocacy to the council at this point. Yes.
Well, I trust you'll be an effective advocate for us in the government testimony. Well, in the public, we will, probably you'll be more effective than I will be as of late. But the thing that I definitely would support the positions first. So the ARPA positions, #1, R2 staff positions, #2. And because I really do think we need a community engagement person. That would be really helpful for building our capacity. And then the fact we don't have an admin person is actually shocking. They can take calls and do constituent service work. I think it'd be really beneficial. So that would be, for me, ahead of the chamber. I think looking at the overall budget, I think the high school's made out well. I think middle school's a mixed bag. They got some money back. And then I think the elementary schools, though, there's still a concern with the funding for those. I don't know what you've seen in your individual wards. I know in Ward 3, some of the schools got positions back, but they're still losing teachers, which is a big concern for me, is that we shouldn't be cutting teachers from our schools right now. So I think if I could advocate for anything, it would be trying to undo those cuts, particularly at the elementary school level. I'm going to put a spreadsheet together over the weekend, which I'll be glad to share with everybody as to what that would take to kind of get us back to neutrality. So we're not cutting teachers, but I think that's still a huge concern. And I know it was a tight budget year, but I just think the last thing we want to be cutting in the city is teachers. So that would be my push for adding anything else. And the only other thing I was concerned about looking at the books is OSSI's not really clear if they've invested enough money in special ed transportation to be able to solve this issue. A lot of the expenditure should be this fiscal year, with the incentives, the hiring incentives they're putting in place. But I think it would just be helpful for us to know, because this is probably the single biggest issue I'm getting complaints about, is whether or not they've actually budgeted for enough bus drivers in fiscal year 24 to be able to not have this recur again, because we're going to end up in court receivership if we keep on this track, and that's really scary. So those would be, I guess, those two things that I would put on the list.
And I see Representative Chang. I also have some thoughts that are.
I have a question for folks who may understand the budget better than I do, and also Chairman Mendelson's legislation last year. does the,
When you say legislation, you mean the students first? I think he's calling it.
First.
does the legislation create room for declining populations of students, right? Because that's where when I was looking through, got very confused around what happens if a school has lower enrollment. Doesn't that mean it actually makes sense for the budget to go down? Otherwise, how are we? Yeah, I think that's my very
I have an
naive question.
I'm sure other people have opinions, but I have an opinion.
Yeah, it does allow for that
Okay.
if it's enough to reduce a full class.
Gotcha.
But no
This is
more
my
than
understanding.
5%, right? Isn't
But
it?
yeah, but there's also this other, like,
Yeah, so that's the tricky part. Like it's so two things. One is that it's no more than 5%. And honestly, because we've misspent things like at-risk funds in the past, it kind of bakes in some of that inequity, in my opinion. I actually have some schools that do better with, and this is crazy to say, it seems like, but with what the chancellor did and what the mayor did than what Mendelson's legislation would propose. Yeah, so I would expect, this is my 2 cents as an individual. I would expect, since it's Mendelson's baby, it's legislation, he is going to do things to get as close to his legislation as possible. That would be my assumption, and he has pretty much said as much. But I would say if DCPS followed his legislation, I know I have some schools who really needed the investment who would have fared worse.
Which raises for me the question then of if we assume that is to be the case, that he will fund schools according to his legislation, where he will take that money from. And if that comes from other education sources, what that actually means for those other education programs.
I have a theory, and I theorize he may try to go to Central for some of it. I don't know how successful that will be, but under the concept of his legislation, he proposed about taking the cuts from Central. I mean, just if I could add one thought about the legislation, I don't think it's actually legally sufficient at all. I don't think it would ever hold up in court. And I think that's why they probably haven't pursued it, because, I mean, under both constitutional separation of powers and the Home Rule Act, the mayor proposes a budget and the council basically gets to amend and approve the budget. We looked at this issue extensively with Peter Nichols, who was a very aggressive AG for Fenty when he was mayor, and just looked at what the council's powers were. And the council does not have the power to set budget numbers for schools using a formula, because it's taking discretion away from the mayor, really taking all discretion away. So I don't think there's any likely chance it would hold up in court. I assume the mayor will continue ignoring it. And I asked Brian Schwab for clarification on it, because I don't think it's valid, but he hasn't responded. So.
Yeah, I mean, everything I said is what I am guessing, just like everybody else. We are literally in the process of rescheduling our meeting with the chairman. If people have questions about school budget, even if we can't go do everybody's school budget, you should let us know, because then we can send them and saying like, here's what we would like answers to and pay attention to. I think you know that Bijan is our new contact in the chairman's office. So I think that was part of the, Lakeisha's still there, but Bijan is added. So if there are questions like that, we are happy to pass them on. Sorry, my delay, I'm not gonna you next. My delay thought, going back to you, Representative Goulet, with the 4 positions. So honestly, I personally am of the mindset that we need to be like, we need all 4.
Yeah.
Like, I would like us to go in and be like, we need all 4, and here's my rationale. And I want to check with you all to see if it's reasonable, and if there are things that either that should be added, subtracted, or whatever. First of all, we know that revenues are forecasted down in out years. If we don't get these positions now, we are going to be in trouble for years out. I do not feel confident that we can get new positions in out years, and we are overdue for getting some new positions. The admin position in particular, there are huge burdens that our staff, it doesn't just support our SBOE staff, it also supports ombuds and OSA. So like when we got the grant through OSSI for the special ed hub, no administrative support came with that. It was still just Roma processing all the things. And like, that's not tenable. So we need, like, I'm kind of like, we need all four no matter what. And honestly, it's not that much money.
Yep.
So like, by my raggedy crew rough calculation, I can't imagine it will cost more than $500,000 to fund 4 positions, and that includes fringe and benefits, which in a $20 billion budget is couch cushion money.
Yep.
So I would like to go in as the SBOE president and say, give us all our things. But I want to make sure that makes sense to the board, but I would like to hold the line. I'm willing to, like, I'm happy to mention the chamber, like, I'm happy to make a case for everything, but at the end of the day, like, I don't feel comfortable with doing anything less than going to the mat for all 4 of those positions. So tell me what y'all think. Yes.
100%.
Everybody.
I'm in agreement with that. I think that the cost of what we're asking for on top of the usefulness of building up the agency is most significant. I mean, the only other thing that I can think about funding was the stuff that we had prioritized with the literacy stuff, but I don't know if asking for a particular budget item as opposed to how we want to build up the SBOE generally would kind of fall flat, where supporting the development of the agency seems most critical right now in my view.
Yeah, one enables the other.
Yeah.
I feel strongly that my work is on the task force would not have been possible the last few months without that.
I would like us to continuously leave this agency better than we found it, assuming we don't all aspire to permanent lifelong SBOE office. No, I mean, but seriously. Like,
I know, but I just
it
don't know how
matters.
long my life will be.
Oh, goodness, gosh. Well, is there anything else on budget that we need to know? We will, of course, send around the agency testimony. The staff is working on it. Our ask is that if you are registering to testify, that you, as always, just send us the testimonies for awareness, because Malayo is tracking you anyway. We will also share out the information, like the talking points we have around the priority ask for the agency, if you would like to include them, either in written or verbal testimony. I, of course, am going to reach out to my member, and I'm going to reach out to every single member I can get a hold of. And I hope you all will do the same, because again, it's couch cushion money. So I think if they know we're paying attention, we can solidly get those 4 positions. If somebody magically can come up with a new chamber for us, I support that. So I'm not saying don't like ask for less, but I'm saying please ask for more.
Can I have a clarifying question?
Yes.
I looked at last year's budget and it looked like there was money in there for the council chamber for technology.
So that's
Is that-
different.
Okay.
So that's the other thing. I guess I was in the admin update that we forgot. So we have the Office of the Student Advocate and the Office of the Ombudsman are moving. Their chambers are being updated, like their offices, not our chamber. That has been in the works for a very, very long time. Literally, it was the subject of every meeting I have been a part of with the chairman and leadership, at least for the last year, and probably before that. During that time, part of the time they will assume a hybrid posture. And so that money is for their offices. It's not, we don't have any money for our chambers. So that's previous money that's finally getting spent. Thank you, Captain. That's a good question. All right, if there's nothing else on this, I'm happy to move us forward. We have three more topics, sorry, Alice. Special education panel debrief. That was supposed to be led by Dr. Fleischer. Back to you again.
And then I'm working off of Lauren's on policy fellows notes that she meticulously put together. They should be in your folder. It's a memo form, but she did a great job of listening back to the public meeting, and not just the panelists, but also the public witnesses. And Colleen, thank you for raising that as a topic. So looking at this, I'm not going to go into great detail with this, but just how this is broken out is by areas of need that were expressed, as well as potential solutions that were raised by them. I asked Lauren, because she's more of an expert, she has a background in special education, what stood out to her in those discussions. And one thing that she wanted me to highlight was deficit thinking mindset is the biggest barrier to appropriately supporting students with special needs. And this would come in with how teachers approach it. So this could be, in terms of potential solutions, advocating for good professional development for educators around students with special needs. Other things that came up, I remember one of the students mentioned this as a public witness, but also other panelists around transportation and just making sure that is available to them, and having a little bit more wait time for those students. Other areas of need that stood out in terms were lack of out of school time and enrichment opportunities, students with disabilities having higher levels of discipline issues, and then the teacher turnover rates around that. And this could also be folded into the teacher retention. And so again, this, as you read through these, this might be another area that you could think about during your committee work planning, of just how this fits in with all of that, as well as the myriad of other things going on in the city. But if you, please let me know if you have any questions. She did a good job of pointing out any areas where someone brought up something that looked like a statistic. She footnoted in this report, or they just mentioned it and there was no reference to a report. But that's all in here.
Yes, Derek, can you, or Dr. Fletcher, can you remind us, this same panel was ran in 2019 or 2020? 2020. And not the same, but like literally two of the folks who testified this time testified last time.
Yes.
And I asked that because I'm curious, like, what did the board do last time around that panel? To see if there's like things that we, like if there's already a resolution that we just might need to pick up, work on, or include in committee work plans, or just revisit. Do you know that offhand?
I am writing this down.
Okay.
I'm gonna make an action item, but
Yeah.
just that's a great question. And actually that's kind of how we were talking about this panel, is as a follow-up to a panel. That panel was specifically for what's going on in COVID.
Okay.
As a snapshot in time, what is going on with special education students? And overwhelmingly, they're falling by the wayside during COVID.
Yeah.
So this is a follow-up snapshot. Where are we here?
Gotcha. Yeah, it's not much different. I listened to that panel and it's not much different. I guess a couple of things that kind of just my immediate like thoughts, and curious to see like whatever committee possibly, if it all picks like things up. Like I know professional development was thrown out there, and I'm looking specifically at the point on the second page. It says whole LEA is accountable for ensuring a return on investment for money spent on professional development. My immediate reaction is like, OSCE also needs to be, kind of held to some vision related to our special education offerings, et cetera. I'm also like professional development is kind of a surface issue of you're not going to be as great with your professional development as you are with the opportunity to actually practice what you learn. And how are special educators given opportunities to practice what they learn in a safe space? Barada, no, not Sophia Barada, it's my opinion teacher. Camarada, Julie Camarada mentioned the model classroom at Bridges, where they actually have an opportunity to kind of implement what they see. It's kind of like, how can we bring other educators in to see that and then also practice that, or even tie that into pipeline work. So I just want to kind of expand on that point of like, yes, professional development, but it's also professional development is something else. I also want to pick up the point of that an invitation that Maria Blur, Flower, who her name wrong, invited us to lean into the work of AJE, because she had that whole, and I didn't get a chance to open it yet, like pages of summary of, again, things that she presented last time, and she was like, the only thing that's new is like a handful of things. So I kind of want us, and AJE is our federally funded parent information center. So it's kind of like, how can the board lean into like what the stories that they're hearing and assisting parents with, and like kind of being partners. And I will say, like, I'm happy to see certain things like, what is this? It's an event coming up in Ward 7 where AJE is present and the Special Education Hub is present. Like, I think that is a good start, but like, how do we also kind of build that a little more? This is just like my initial kind of responses to like hearing that panel, hearing those like heavy stories, kind of being sitting in with like a lot of the stuff we are, you know, it's incremental. I don't know if it's incremental increases or we're still checking backwards. So it's like, I love that we had that panel. It's like, what do we do with that information? As a board, what's in our scope? What do we have capacity to do? What do we need to lean in with our partners on doing? Yeah, there's also leadership side too. So it's a lot that I was just like, I didn't want us to just have that panel and not have like a follow-up conversation. And I'm not sure if other members felt moved about things they've heard, wanted to do or explore, but that's kind of my initial reaction to your guys. Thoughts, not really questions.
Just to add to that, so Lauren is continuing to do that work and think through what to do as a follow-up project on that. And so more to come on that, but it's not just put to bed now. That's part of it. One other thing that I wanted to mention in here was, one piece was accountability piece for our DCPS and public charter schools. I know, what does that look like? That's something else she might think about, or what that might look like. I know with the DC report card and revisions to that, maybe it looks like that. Whatever that looks like, that was just another piece that I wanted to highlight from this report.
Thanks for pulling that all together. Or thank Lauren too.
Yeah, I thought that Carla Reedwood's testimony was really interesting about drawing connections to governance. The other thing that stood out to me was just like compliance. Like, where are we not compliant to federal law in these issues? And what's the mechanism for accountability there?
Submit data on a yearly basis. Some of those indicators are not making the mark, but there's a response that gets approved upon. But I also believe in, you know, that's kind of the floor. Like, can we work in DC, like make, I guess the ultimate question for me is like, where does, it's such a big issue, where do you start filling any gains? And that's something I would like sit down with Maria or other folks to kind of be like, what do you, where can we make some increases, knowing that it's going to take a long time.
I'm pausing to make space for other thoughts in case there are. And don't feel pressured to have thoughts. This is one of the reasons we have like maybe some things. So if there are things identified, as staff has put together wonderful follow-up materials They can always be taken into committees and into the work plan if you feel so moved. Also feel encouraged to follow up with people directly. Carla's awesome. She was my first boss when I worked for ECPS, and she remains in Ward 7 all of her kids. One of my favorites. If there are not additional thoughts at this time, I'm going to move us to next steps for education and governance. All right, hearing none. I think we can move on. So I. I know it's on the website.
Yeah.
We can send it. So governance has a.
I'm sorry, can you just say that again so we can put it in the notes? Because I know that.
I want to say the real version.
Okay, sure.
Not my whisper to, less than whisper to Darren. Okay, so governance has a full work plan which was adopted by the board. As part of that work plan goes all the way through not just adoption, but dissemination. Dissemination includes transmission to the council, which I believe is supposed to happen this week. It also includes Malayo weighing in and like creating materials. It includes a legislative briefing at some point for staff, which would happen after the budget season, because I can't imagine council would come to staff. Council staff will come to a legislative session to explain to them like what's in the report. They might be a little busy with the budget. And it includes follow-up with organizations and individuals who were part of the pulling together of the report. So for example, if we went to a Ward 7 Education Council meeting, we would go back to the Ward 7 Education Council and let them know what's in the report. Or if the state committee is having a discussion on statehood, there are things that relate to who we want to grow up to be a state one day. We should be talking to them. And or individuals who participated in things like the focus group and making sure they know what the final product was. Yeah, so I apologize for not having the work plan in front of us. It has been a day of days. But we did want to, I guess, like start to like let you know what some of the steps were. And given that we are largely going to be focused on budget for the next, 60 or so days, invite opportunities for feedback during that time, both like starting now, but in case you have additional thoughts, because we will not be, like the council and everybody else is going to be focused on budget. And so in addition to social service efforts. So that is my overview, but I do want to open it up for questions and discussion. I'm okay with that either, because it is a standing conversation, and I'm running out of steam, and some of you all look like you are too. All right. Last new business item. Representative Chang.
Yes. One of my constituents, who is a teacher, also in a Ward 2 school, reached out, and we have had now several conversations about the difference between a special education certificate and a modified diploma. And it feels like a simple switch, but as I've been looking into it, it is more complicated. But the problem is this, right? If you get a certificate, you can't go to a two-year college. It's just not as meaningful as a modified diploma, or some states call it a modified diploma, some states call it a IEP diploma. And her ask, and something that I would like to raise for one of the committees as a point of discussion, as not the special education expert, with right next to Dr. Reed is, you know, is this something that we could advocate for and take on? And what does that actually look like? But, you know, reading through this, I get into a lot of Title IX requirements that I don't fully understand without digging into it further. And then, but taking the path of just looking at what other states do, it is all over the place. We're one of a bunch that do call it a certificate, but there are many others who call it a modified diploma.
Are you reading from something?
No, I have like a literature review of some things that I read.
Well, I would say Representative Chang, one of the reasons I asked if it was part of the education panel debrief, because I'm terrible. I'm getting better. It takes me a couple times to be like, your name, your face, but I remember a face. And I will remember what you said to me. There was actually a panelist who talked about this at the special education. I remember because I asked about River Terrace. I have River Terrace in Ward 7, but every single one of those students actually graduates with a certificate. I would actually invite you to visit River Terrace because, and I've had this conversation with the principal there, because those students particularly have a lot of like developmental disabilities, both cognitive and physical. And the ones who have cognitive disabilities, they absolutely are graduating with certificates, which is different than I think students who have special education services for other reasons, right? And so like there are levels and like tiers to this. And I suspect even given that, we have work to do. But I know, and I'm just getting tired, but I know that that's something that their campus thinks very intentionally about as far as like placement of students, what supports they need. I go to their promotion every year. It is actually quite impressive. Yeah, so, and we do have graduation requirements as something that is a board thing, as we talked about with community service. So maybe that's something we refer to a committee, but there are also probably some learning opportunities that people might want to undertake as far as what's going on across our state. But that was the reason I asked, did you want to couch it in there? Because I was like, I heard someone talk about it. It was testimony.
I would also be saying with that visit. I used to work there and we had a student, well, it's not great because he probably should not have been the only student. But in that history or recent history, one student, I think they had adjust curriculum or adjust instruction, and they were able to get him a diploma or graduation, what is it, a diploma? Get him a diploma versus the certificate of completion that the rest of the students were getting. However, in reflecting of that experience, it was kind of like how many other students, yes, given needs, but then also had the ability to possibly have that opportunity to get a full diploma versus certificate of completion. And I'm sure they have a lot of information that they would like to share about that process. There's a lot of issues with funding that they're probably excited to share too. So that's another resource in our city, because there's a lot of graduations for completion with a few students who could have had.
So Dr. Reed, very direct question, is it something worth pursuing?
I think so, because I'm thinking about the students that we had, junior students who with some supports, with some, if we were really doing like individualized instruction, making the IEP truly individual to a student, that if we had pulled the city's resources together, they could have also had. But like, I think we're going back to this in our wheelhouse, what were the courses, experiences they would need to get that versus the certificate of completion? And so it might be sharing between schools, make sure they have transportation to that other school. Like they really do all resources on deck for this student because they saw he wanted a job at BC Airport.
Yeah, a diploma.
Right. So yeah, I think they're worth the conversation, and then also look at what other states do, and then Aussie's buy-in or somebody's buy-in to like actually see like what are require us to.
Okay.
I like it. But, thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Have thoughts?
I've got one thing. Am I jumping in on somebody?
Jump in.
We, there are so many students in our schools in the District of Columbia who have special needs. Half of the students who have special needs are not identified for special needs. I think since this is in our purview of the board as far as graduation requirements and things like that, I think that this is a perfect time for us to run with this ball. So I'll do whatever I can to try to work with this, because this is, because it's not just the students, it's the parents. If you go back to the testimony the other day, when the young man was testifying with his mother, I mean, I have a child with special needs. I know a lot of people, I know I have a special needs, identified special need, ADD. And there's so many students and parents and caregivers that are affected by that, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to give a child an extra brain kind of bump as far as, and like when you were talking, Representative Chang, about the different levels of diploma that are all over the country. I think that we need to identify, that's why I was asking if you were reading it right in front of you. But let's I'd love to work with that.
That is our final item for new business. So I'm going to thank the members for their engagement and their time this evening. As a reminder to anyone who stepped with us in the viewing public, the state board will continue to hold its meetings in person, and we will convene our April public meeting on April 26th. Note that that is much later in the month than we normally meet. Again, spring break and several religious holidays. If there's no other business before the state board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? I hope not. Any abstentions? All right, we are adjourned. It is 7:53. I know it's just getting dark though. That's actually not give you surprised.
That was good.
I saw you over there.
Yeah.
You were struggling at the last.
I was.